In the shadow of Montana's unforgiving peaks, a grieving widow named Elena Harper fled the city with nothing but her late husband's loyal German Shepherd Ranger and a wild plan to build a home inside a limestone cave.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I haven't heard that in
The
years.
townsfolk laughed, calling it the widow's hole.
Amen to that.
They never imagined that when the deadliest blizzard in decades buried Silver Ridge alive, the madwoman and her dog would emerge as the only ones untouched, and the ones who would change everything. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. The wind came down from the high ridges of Montana like a slow, cold breath, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. In the late fall of the year, Elena Harper arrived. The sky stayed gray for days, and the world felt smaller, quieter, as though it were waiting for something to break. Elena Harper was 33, a woman whose face still held the soft lines of youth, but carried the weight of 3 years without her husband. Fair skin, shoulder-length, straight, dark brown hair that she rarely bothered to pin back, blue eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. She was slim, sturdy from months of hard work already, standing about 5'6". She wore a thick, dark gray-green parka with a fur-lined hood pulled low, a gray turtleneck sweater underneath, durable jeans tucked into high waterproof leather boots lined with sheepskin, a brown wool scarf wrapped twice around her neck, and leather gloves with a wool lining. She moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned that every step cost something. 3 years earlier, she had watched her husband's truck slide on black ice, the slow spin, the impact she could not reach. The memory lived in her chest like a stone. She had left the city behind, sold everything that reminded her of shared mornings, and bought this rough 20 acres with its limestone cave system. The land was cheap because no one thought it worth much. To Elena, it was shelter. She came with little more than tools, books on stone and timber, and Ranger. Ranger was a German Shepherd, 4 or 5 years old, black and tan coat thick and glossy from daily brushing, muscular build carrying about 90 pounds of quiet strength. His ears stood pointed when he listened, and his eyes, dark amber, held a steady, knowing light. He wore a thick black-gray waterproof dog coat Elena had lined with extra wool, and a black leather collar with a small silver tag engraved Ranger. He had belonged to her husband first, trained to guard, to wait, to love without question. Now he walked at Elena's heel, slept at the foot of her narrow cot in the old trailer she used until the cabin was ready, and woke the instant her breathing changed in the night. The nightmares came often. She would jerk awake, heart hammering, the sound of metal tearing still ringing in her ears. Ranger rose without a sound, paws soft on the wooden floor, climbed onto the cot, pressed his warm side against her ribs. He nudged her hand with his nose, then matched her ragged breaths, slow inhale, slower exhale, until her pulse steadied. In those moments the cave walls seemed to lean closer, holding the quiet between them. Elena would rest her palm on the rise and fall of his ribs and think, he remembers too. Not the crash, perhaps, but the absence that followed. She began to understand that Ranger was not simply left over from another life. He had chosen her, stayed when everything else left. That choice, small and wordless, was the first crack of light in 3 dark years. One afternoon she drove the old pickup into Silver Ridge for nails and lamp oil. The town was small, wooden storefronts, a single hardware store with a pot-bellied stove inside, men in flannel and worn boots talking low. Elena kept her hood up, paid in cash, spoke little. At the counter she overheard 2 women near the coffee pot. "That Harper woman," one said, voice carrying just enough, "building a house inside a cave, calls it home, more like the widow's hole." Laughter followed, soft but sharp. Elena felt heat rise in her throat, but said nothing. She loaded the truck, drove the 5 miles back through the gathering dusk. Inside the cave mouth, the wind dropped away. She sat on a crate near the future cabin site, tools scattered around her feet. Tears came then, silent at first, then shaking her shoulders. Ranger appeared from the shadows, pressed his head into her lap. She buried her face in the thick fur of his neck. "They don't understand, Ranger," she whispered. "They don't know what it's like to lose the only place you belonged." He licked once at the salt on her cheek, then settled beside her, heavy and warm, his breathing steady as stone. The cave was silent except for the faint drip of water somewhere deep. In that stillness, Elena felt something shift. Not healing, not yet, but a promise. She would finish what she started here. Not to prove anything to the town, not even to prove it to herself, only because Ranger stayed. Because he believed the dark was safe when they were together. Spring came to the Montana hills with a soft thaw, the snow melting into rivulets that whispered down the limestone face. Sunlight reached farther into the cave mouth each day, touching the rough stone walls with pale gold, and the air carried the clean smell of wet earth and budding pine. Elena worked from first light. She cleared loose rock from the main chamber, leveled the floor with shovel and pick, measured twice before cutting each log. The cabin rose slowly, solid pine walls, a sloped roof to shed the little moisture that seeped in, 2 small windows facing the entrance to catch the light. She ran a simple pipe from the year-round spring deeper in the cave for water, built shelves into natural alcoves for stores of flour, beans, dried meat. For Ranger, she made a low wooden platform bedded with old blankets, sheltered from drafts. She explained it to herself in quiet moments. The cave held steady at 55 degrees, winter and summer. No wind could reach inside. Snow would never bury the roof. It was not madness. It was reason. Yet every trip to town for more nails or glass brought the same sidelong glances. Men at the feed store would nod politely, then turn away to mutter. "She's digging her own grave in there," one said once, loud enough. Elena heard, felt the old ache in her chest tighten, but she kept her eyes on the counter, paid, left. The words followed her home like smoke. One warm afternoon in early summer, a pickup rattled up the dirt track. 4 young men, 18 to 25, lean and loud, hair short and messy under backward caps, dark bomber jackets over hoodies, jeans worn at the knees. They parked at the cave mouth, engines idling, and stepped out laughing. One picked up a fist-sized stone, lobbed it lightly toward the entrance. "Hey, widow, checking if your cave's going to fall on you." Another threw, the rock clattering against the wall. Elena straightened from her sawhorse, hammer in hand, dust on her parka. Before she could speak, Ranger exploded from the shadows, deep bark rolling like thunder, black and tan coat bristling, ears flat, teeth bared in warning. He planted himself between her and the boys, legs stiff, every muscle taut. The laughter died. The young men backed up, hands raised, then scrambled into the truck. Tires spun gravel as they fled. Elena's knees buckled. She dropped the hammer, sank to the stone floor. Ranger turned, pressed against her side, still growling low until the engine faded. She wrapped her arms around his neck, felt the rapid beat of his heart, slow to match hers. In that moment, something cracked open inside her. Not anger, not shame, but a quiet certainty. He had not just guarded her body. He had stood for her dignity when she could not. She buried her face in his fur, breathed the warm, familiar scent of him. "We keep going," she whispered. Together. After that day, she began teaching Ranger small tasks. Fetch the level from the toolbox. Carry a coil of rope. Sit watch at the entrance while she worked high on a ladder. He learned fast, head tilted, eyes locked on hers, tail sweeping once when he understood. Each success earned a quiet, "Good boy," an arm around his shoulders, the words she needed to hear herself say, "You're my partner, Ranger, not just a dog." The cave filled with the sounds of their shared labor, hammer strikes, the soft pad of his paws, her low voice giving commands. The town's laughter still drifted on the wind sometimes, faint and distant. But inside the chamber, it grew quieter. Elena felt the weight in her chest lighten inch by inch. Not gone, never gone, but shared. She looked at Ranger one evening as the sun slanted low, painting the stone walls amber. He lay at her feet, chin on paws, watching her with those steady amber eyes. She reached down, rested her hand on the warm dome of his head. In the silence, she made a promise to them both. Whatever came next, winter, mockery, memory, she would not turn back, because he had never turned away. Winter settled over the Montana ridges like a heavy quilt, the snow falling soft and steady, blanketing the world in white silence. Inside the cave, the air stayed mild, the stone walls holding the warmth of the small stove as though they had always known how to cradle a fire. The cabin stood finished now, simple, sturdy, its pine logs glowing honey gold in the lamplight. Elena needed only a handful of wood each day. The cave's steady 55 degrees did the rest. She sat evenings by the stove, a wool blanket across her lap, reading old novels or the almanac, while Ranger stretched out on his platform bed nearby. His black and tan coat gleamed from her daily brushing, the ritual slow and deliberate, long strokes from ears to tail, his eyes half closed in trust. She fed him twice a day, spoke to him in low tones about nothing important, the way the light shifted on the cave ceiling, the sound of wind far away. He answered with a soft thump of his tail, or a deep sigh when she scratched behind his ears. They were a small family of two, and the days passed without hurry. The town's whispers still reached her on supply runs. "She'll come crawling out when the cold bites," but they sounded thinner now, like echoes from another life. Elena felt the old grief still there, a dull ache under her ribs, yet it no longer owned every hour. Ranger's presence had carved out room for something gentler. One bitter night in January, the wind howled outside, rattling nothing inside. Elena pulled the old leather journal from the shelf, her husband's words in careful handwriting. She opened it to a page she had read many times, but never aloud. "Ranger is the guardian of this house," it said. "He watches when I can't. He loves without asking why." She set the book down, looked at the dog curled at her feet. Ranger lifted his head, amber eyes meeting hers in the firelight. She spoke quietly. "He chose you for me, Ranger, and now you've chosen me." The words hung in the warm air. Ranger rose, patted over, rested his heavy head across her knees. She cupped his muzzle, felt the steady warmth of his breath on her wrists. Their gazes held, long, still, and in that quiet exchange something passed between them, wordless and shirkyashar. The loneliness that had shadowed her for 3 years eased, not gone, but shared. She stroked the broad dome of his skull, felt the faint vibration of his contented rumble. For the first time she believed she might not always carry the weight alone. Ranger began to sense the weather before the barometer did. Days before the first real cold snap, he grew restless, pacing the chamber, ears pricked, nose testing the air that slipped through the entrance. Elena watched him, noted the way his tail lowered, the soft whine when the pressure dropped. She trusted him more than the brass instrument on the wall. "You're my weatherman now," she said one evening, half smiling as she scratched his chest. He thumped his tail once, settled beside her again. The cave held them both, safe from the gathering storm outside. Elena looked toward the dark entrance where snow swirled in faint eddies, then back at Ranger's steady profile. She thought of the years ahead, the winters that would come, the memories that would not fade. But she also thought of this, a dog who had never left, who listened when no one else did, who believed in her when she doubted. In the hush of the cave, with only the crackle of the fire and Ranger's even breathing, she made a silent vow. Whatever lay waiting in the white world beyond, she would face it with him, because he had already shown her the way through the darkest nights. The storm arrived without warning, a wall of white roaring down from the north, swallowing the mountains in minutes. The temperature plunged to 30 below, the wind screaming over 60 miles an hour, driving snow so thick it erased the world beyond the cave mouth. Elena and Ranger had been out checking trap lines that afternoon. The sky had turned the color of old lead, the air suddenly sharp and electric. Ranger felt it first, tail low, ears forward, a low whine rising in his throat. Elena looked up, saw the horizon vanish, and they ran. The cave entrance swallowed them just as the blizzard hit full force. Inside, the howl cut off like a door slammed shut. The stone held the warmth, the temperature steady, the air still. Elena leaned against the wall, breath fogging in the lantern light, heart pounding. Ranger pressed close, his black and tan coat dusted white, shaking snow from his ears. She knelt, brushed him down, felt the solid warmth of him under her hands. Outside, the storm raged on. 5 days it would last, the worst Montana had seen in memory. But here, in the cave's quiet belly, they were safe. Elena fed Ranger first, then built the stove fire low. They ate simple food, shared the silence. She listened to the muffled roar beyond the entrance, thought of the town 5 miles away, wondered how they fared. The worry settled in her chest, but Ranger's steady breathing beside her kept it from growing too large. On the 3rd day, the memories came hardest. The cabin felt too small, the walls too close. Elena stood at the entrance passage, staring into the white chaos. She told herself she only wanted to see how bad it was, to measure the drifts. 1 step out, the wind caught her like a hand, shoved her backward. She stumbled, fell hard on the icy stone just inside the threshold, half out, half in. Panic rose sharp, cold burning her lungs, the storm pulling at her coat. Ranger was there in an instant. He lunged forward, teeth closing gently on her sleeve, hauling with all his weight. His body blocked the worst of the gust, fur bristling, barking deep and urgent until she scrambled back into the passage. She collapsed against the wall, shaking, tears freezing on her cheeks. Ranger stood over her, paws planted, still growling at the wind as though it were an enemy he could drive away. Elena reached for him, arms around his neck, face buried in the thick ruff. "You saved me," she whispered, voice breaking. "Not just today, from the day he left, every day since." The words spilled out, raw and true. Ranger licked the salt from her face, slow and careful, then lowered himself across her lap, heavy and warm, his ribs rising and falling against her trembling body. In that moment, the grief she had carried alone cracked wide open, not to destroy her, but to let something new breathe. Ranger had never asked her to be strong. He had simply stayed. Later, when the shaking eased, Elena sat by the stove with Ranger's head in her lap. She began to hum an old lullaby her husband used to sing on winter nights, soft, simple, the notes rising like smoke. Ranger listened, ears pricked. Then low in his throat, he answered. A quiet, rising howl, not loud, just enough to join her. The sound wove through the cabin, gentle and sure. Elena's voice faltered, then steadied. Tears came again, but different, warm, releasing. She laughed once, small and surprised, through the crying. Life still held meaning. Not the old life, not the one she had lost. This one, the one with a dog who howled lullabies and pulled her back from the edge. She stroked his ears, felt the soft fur under her fingers, the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the storm howled on, but inside the cave, something had shifted forever. Elena looked down at Ranger's amber eyes, calm and certain. In the firelight, she made her quiet promise. Whatever came after the snow melted, town, people, the rest of her days, she would carry this forward. Because he had carried her when she could not stand. On the 6th morning, the wind died, the snow stopped falling, and a pale winter sun rose over the drifts. The world lay still and bright, scarred but breathing, the air so cold it burned the lungs, yet carried the faint promise of thaw. Elena saddled nothing. She simply clipped Ranger's lead to his collar and walked the 5 miles to Silver Ridge. The snow reached higher than a man in places. She broke trail, Ranger bounding ahead, nose to the ground, tail sweeping slow arcs. When they crested the last ridge, the town came into view. Roofs collapsed under weight, chimneys toppled, doors frozen shut. Smoke rose thin and ragged from a few stoves still burning. 7 graves had already been dug on the hill behind the church. People moved like ghosts among the ruins, faces hollow, eyes red from cold and grief. Elena felt the old instinct to turn away, to retreat to her cave and its quiet. But Ranger tugged gently forward, ears pricked toward the voices. She followed. Mayor Thompson stood near the ruined church, 58 years old, broad-shouldered once, but now stooped under the days of struggle. His short graying hair was uncovered, salt and pepper beard rimmed with frost, dark brown parka open despite the cold. Plaid flannel shirt beneath, worn jeans tucked into old leather boots. His voice was low, hoarse from shouting orders that could not stop the storm. He looked up as Elena approached, and for a moment his weathered face showed something close to disbelief. "Harper, you're alive." The words carried wonder, shame, relief all at once. Children, small bundles in bright coats and pom-pom hats, spotted Ranger first. They ran despite their parents' warnings, drawn to the big dog who stood calm, tail wagging slow. Ranger lowered his head, let tiny mittened hands bury in his thick fur, endured the hugs without shifting. One little girl looked up at Elena with wide eyes. "You and Ranger are heroes." Elena knelt, voice soft. "No, sweetheart, Ranger's the hero. He taught me how to love again." The words surprised her as much as the child, but they felt true. Thompson asked about the cave. Elena told him, quietly, plainly, how the stone had held the cold at bay, how 15 or 20 could fit if needed. He listened without interruption, the old mockery gone from his eyes. "Would you open it to us, if another storm comes?" She looked at the broken homes, the tired faces, then at Ranger, sitting patient beside her. "Yes," she said, "it was never just for me." In the weeks that followed, the town rebuilt slowly. Elena spoke at gatherings in the schoolhouse, Ranger always at her side. She talked not of triumph, but of listening, to the land, to instinct, to the quiet wisdom animals carry. People came to the cave afterward, some to thank, some to sit in its stillness and speak of their own losses. Ranger would lie beside them, head on a knee or paw, amber eyes steady. Elena watched and understood. The cave had become more than shelter. It was a place where grief could be shared without shame. Years passed. Elena grew older, hair threaded silver, lines deeper around her eyes, but the parka still fit. The boots still carried her through snow. Ranger aged too, muzzle gray, steps slower. But his coat stayed glossy from her careful brushing, his gaze as clear as ever. They sat together one evening by the stove, firelight dancing on the stone walls. A bronze plaque now hung at the cave entrance, Elena Harper's Refuge, where pain is shared and loyalty saves a community. Elena rested her hand on Ranger's warm head. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You saved all of us." He sighed, leaned into her touch. Outside, the Montana night was quiet, the stars sharp and close. Inside, the small fire crackled, and two old friends breathed in perfect rhythm. The storm had taken much, but it had left this, a life rebuilt on gentleness, on trust given and returned, and that, in the end, was enough. As the firelight fades in Elena's cave, remember this: loneliness doesn't have to win. Many of us over 65 know the quiet ache of empty rooms, the weight of old grief, the slow creep of illness that steals strength day by day. Yet like Ranger's steady warmth beside her, love, simple, loyal, even from a pet, a neighbor, or a memory, can still pull us through the darkest nights. You are not forgotten. Reach out today. Share your story in the comments. Tell someone you care. Subscribe so we walk this road together. May the Lord wrap you in peace, ease your pain, and remind you, you are loved always. Keep holding on. God bless you.